Okay, we're continuing with Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes by me, P. Rogers, in alphabetical order. This is Barbara Oakley. She's a PhD professor of engineering at Oakland University. Wrote a book called The Mind for Numbers about study skills. And here she says, the attempting to recall the material you are trying to learn, retrieval practice, is far more effective than simply rereading the material. Simply rereading the material creates the illusion of competence. By simply practicing and recalling the material, students learn far more and at a much deeper level than by using any other method. So what she's basically saying is, typical student, they just look at their notes that are highlighted and then they hope they remember it for the test. But that's really a wimpy way to study. What you want to do is close the book, put the book down, start walking around and start talking to yourself. Because if you can articulate the material, then you know it at a much higher level than somebody who simply looked at their notes. And when you articulate it, what will happen is you'll remember 9 out of 10 things. And you go back and you look up the 10 things. Then you try again. You should be able to articulate all 10 things. And then you're making copies of it on the speech part of your brain, the hearing part of your brain. And you can see the whole picture coherently. So you also become real confident. You know the material. You know, you could write out the entire, let's say, biochemistry cycle. Like when I was trying to remember glycolysis, I would say it to myself out loud as I'd walk around in circles in my apartment at that time. Okay? And so, you'll often have an acronym, a mnemonic, some type of concept that unifies the whole thing. Like for me in glycolysis, it was just remembering where the phosphate was. But that makes you a way better student. And, for example, I never did an all-nighter ever. I never even stayed up late. I just studied a lot every day. And, I never drank caffeine. I never took a stimulant, none of that stuff. I just tried to really learn the material. Because you always want a good grade, but I wanted more than that. I wanted to be a great doctor, great scientist, and I'm like, I have to know the material. I'm going to know the material. Anyways, next thing, and here's the next quote from her, Barbara Oakley. She says, the physicist Richard Feynman, when he was 11 years old, an off-the-cuff remark had a transformative impact on him. He remarked to a friend that thinking was nothing other than just talking to yourself inside. And his friend said, oh yeah? You know that crazy shape of the crankshaft in a car? And Feynman says, yeah, what of it? His friend says, now tell me, how did you describe that to yourself when you were talking to yourself? And it was then that Feynman realized that thoughts can be visual as well as verbal. Okay? So, and that comes from Aristotle. We picture things as we think. And you think about a dog, okay? A dog can't speak in words, but a dog knows you. It can tell your mood. So it's probably thinking in pictures is what it seems. Barbara Oakley continues, our ancestors did not need to memorize big numbers. They did need to memorize how to get home after going for a hunt or after finding a fruit tree. These evolutionary needs help lock in superior where things are and how they look memory systems. Okay, humans have powerful visual spatial memories, and that's kind of where you get like the memory palace and those memory tricks like the memory contest champions. Look, I'll talk more about memory contest in this little session of quotes. Okay, our next person here is Joyce Carol Oates. She was a writer. She's very prolific, okay? I think she's kind of a lightweight of a writer, but she still has a few decent things to say here. She says, I am always reading or thinking about reading. And that's characteristic of a writer. If you're going to be a writer, you got to love to read. If you don't read a lot, you can't be a good writer. She says, I never change. I simply become more of myself. It is where we go and what we do when we get there that tells us who we really are. Yeah, how you decide to spend your time, that's a moral statement. That's how you've decided to spend your life. For me, I say to myself, what better could I do than study the most advanced stuff in health by learning all this nutrition, epidemiology, toxicology? What better could I do than share what I've learned about Western civilization with the younger generation, which is so ignorant about it, but it's the greatest civilization that ever existed in the history of mankind that's being destroyed right now. What better could I do than spend my time doing this? Yes, you have to accept all the negative stuff. Yes, I'm shadow banned out the wazoo and ostracized and censored, but look on the bright side. If I wasn't, they'd probably, bump me off. So better to be, a little small frog in a small pond than to not be in a pond at all. But, you do what you can. All right, let's continue with Joyce Carol Oates. She says, I've always felt that art is the highest expression of the human spirit. Yeah, it's a great thing. And so it just adds so much joy to life. Keeping busy is the remedy for all ills in America. It is also by this means that the creative impulse is destroyed. Yeah, you need leisure time if you're going to create something great. So it's good to try to figure out how can you get some leisure time. We all need to make some money to pay our bills and get some food, but if you need that leisure time to read, to study, to think, to create something. Okay, her next quote: distractions are the great adversary of creativity. Yeah, you have to simplify your life, and you pay a price for it. Like with my ex-wife, I sort of had to deal with her. She'd be like a landlord. I'd give her one big check every month, a lot of money. I didn't care. I just wanted her to sort of like shield me from the world. I didn't even have a phone for about 12 years. So I could really focus on trying to learn the things I wanted to learn. I could tell. I looked at the internet and I saw, oh my gosh, almost all these big name docs are lying and BSing, promoting supplements, or they don't know what they're talking about. And so I said, gee, I could be the best doctor in the whole world. The only guy who I might not be able to catch is at McDougal. Anyways, that's why I knew. So I reviewed all my biochemistry, all this other stuff. I said, you know what? I'm going to start making a YouTube channel. And that's how it all came about. Anyways, let's go to the next thing. Next quote from Joyce Carol Oates. She said, I believe that the creative impulse is natural in all human beings and that it is particularly powerful in children unless suppressed. Consequently, one is behaving normally and instinctively and healthily when one is creating literature, art, music, or whatever. Yeah, the caveman painted in the cave, and he didn't get any money for that. So it's natural to want to create something. I think it's part, man is created in God's image. God's the creator. We're in his image, so we can be creators too. Joyce Carol Oates. To write something good, it has to be revised. I spend about 90% of my time revising what I have written. Okay. Next, we'll do a quote by Dominic O'Brien. So Dominic O'Brien is a real smart guy. He flunked out of high school because he had dyslexia. And then he went on to become the 8 times world memory champion. He said later when he learned all these memory techniques, why wasn't I taught this in high school? Nobody teaches memory techniques in high school. I've never in my life met a single student that was ever taught study skills in grade school or high school, which shows you what a joke grade schools or high schools are. The most important thing you could teach a young person is study skills. It's by far like the most important thing because you're going to use it for everything else you encounter. They should be learning the ancient Greeks. They should learn the ancient Roman. They should be learning the Bible, among other things in the Renaissance, etc. The great in the Victorian Renaissance, the Catholic Revival, the Tractarian movement, all that stuff, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. These high points of mankind. He's got a book. My favorite memory, and I read a ton of memory skills books, was Super Memory, Super Student by Harry Lorraine. But O'Brien was good too. I read his books. I thought he was good too. So if you're interested in studying that, he's one other person you might want to study. Anyways, hope you found that helpful.